So in Ois Beis, the Rebbe is going to ask, what is the unique and special zchus merit of the Akedah that we attribute to Avram Yitzchak? Avram was ready to bring his son. It doesn't seem like that was more than what we experienced throughout the generation. The Jewish people, unfortunately, have had many difficult situations, and even the idea of it's not only sacrificing yourself, sacrificing your son. Of course, we know the story of Shino, Shiva, Chava Baneo, as the Rebbe will ask. So, in the first question is, why is Akedah special? That if he fails that, we say the rest don't have substance. How would that prove? Maybe he couldn't withstand the stronger one. And in the second question, the Rebbe says, what is it always, we keep on mentioning the Akedah. Why is that so unique and so special, more above and beyond all other nisyonis that the Jewish people had, tests and sacrifices that the Yidden had throughout the generations? Always base. In Klolus Parshas HaAkedah was his called Keren Yisrael, Generally, when we talk about the portion of the Akedah, it says that this is called Keren Yisrael, which is the language of the Barbanel. That this is the root, the horn, the benefit, the privilege, the merit. This is before our Father in heaven. We're always saying about the Akedah. And that's why it's common in our mouth in the davening all day. We always talk about the Akedah. So as you do a dishaila, so then the question is known, what's so special? Why are we always mentioning the Avram binding his son Yitzchak, more than the binding of all the righteous, the holy ones, who have given themselves up for the sanctity of the blessed Hashem? Kegoin, as for example, Rabbi Akiva v'Chaverov, B'chol HaKadoshim, as Rabbi Akiva and his friends. Those are the Asor Harugi Malchus, the 10 great sages that were killed by the Roman government. And all the holy martyrs of every generation and generation, which is the language used by the Sefer HaIkrim. So why is this? Ubefrat, especially Avram was told directly by Hashem to take his son. As by Avram is Hashem diber boy kach no. Of there, the Eibishter told him specifically, take please. Mashenkin the Kedoshim, as opposed to the other holy ones, Shemos through Nafsho, Al Kedushas Hashem, they gave their lives over for the sanctity of Hashem's name. Gam kiloi diber Hashem bo. Even though Hashem did not speak to them, and as the Alter Rebbe writes this language from the Alter Rebbe, and yet they gave up their lives. So why is it so unique and a zechus what Avram did? It must be the answer. The Rebbe says it was not sufficient. The answer that his was not just Mesiras Nefesh, but he was supposed to take his child as Mesiras Nefesh sein an eigen kind, that in order to give up the life of your own child, al Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify the name of Hashem is asach shverer and tifer. It's much more difficult. It's much deeper. Than to give up your own life for the sanctity of Hashem's name. So you can't say that is why Avraham's Mesiras Nefesh was more of a schus, because he took his son, which is even more difficult than giving up your own life. Well, in our field, because we find that even in a much later generation is given there Nisoyan Hayudua, there was the known test from Chana V'Shivas Banel, Chana and her 7 sons. She herself said about in her uh, prayer to Hashem that Ato Okadeto Mizbeach Ato you Avram Okadeto Mizbeach Echod, you bound one Mizbeach. Vani Okadeti Shiva Mizbeach, she lost all of her 7 children. I have bound 7 Mizbeachas for the sanctity of Hashem's name. Und al derech zeh, and similar, and noch them in this Zmane Hashmad Rachmon Litzlan, during the time of the persecution in the dark ages when the Jewish people were murdered in the generation of Shmad, trying to convert to other religions forcefully, then found there were cases when they did not only give up their own lives al Kiddush Hashem, but also their children, etc. as known. So why are we singling out and always mentioning, just like what Avram did, that that's even greater and bigger than all the things that took place? And we keep on mentioning this, but this doesn't seem to be unique, something which has been practiced, not only people giving up their own life, but also giving up their children's life. So why is this schus of Akedas Yitzchak mentioned all the time? He brings down another interpretation, another possible answer for the Sefer Ikrim, that it will start, the beginning is start. He says that Avraham Avinu, if he wanted to get away and not do, the Eibishter gave him like mixed signals. The Eibishter told him that your son is going to be the one. So Hashem himself basically gave him an avenue out, so that if he doesn't want to do it, and yet he did it. So maybe that was special by Avram, because he sort of did it on his own, even if he could have gotten away. But the Rebbe said during history we had people that did that and more than that. It was even a question whether they're allowed to do Mesidus Nefesh in their condition. So that answer that Avram's situation was unique because he could get away, that's not it. That's not what makes it that unique. Let's look inside. There's Sefer Ha'ikrim. Sefer Ha'ikrim is Masbir. He explains. As der Chidush von Akedes Yitzchok is Bashtanen, that what was the novelty of the binding of Yitzchok? It consisted, idem was loinis arev b'pa'al ha'akedah shum tzad hechrech klal, that in the act of binding Yitzchok, there was not mixed in no part that he was forced to do that role. There was nothing forcing Avram to do that. Even though there was a command, even the mitzvah that would not force him to. So the Zehu Dover, why is that? The Eibishter tells him. He says like this: Zehu Dover, Zedover biurura b'seimazal. This matter has been explained by our teachers of blessed memory. Al Posik, and the verse it says Hashem Yeira Gomer. So the Posik says Hashem Yira. He was on the Akedah that Omar Avram lifnei Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Avram said to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the world, Golui v'yodua lefanecha, it is revealed and known before you. Shebishosh amarta likachna es bincha, when you told me, please take your son, as yichidcha, the only one, asher ahavta, that you love as Yitzchak, v'haleu li lo'olam, bring it up to me as an olam. I could have told you, but Did you not tell me already before that Yitzchok will be in the sons of Yitzchok, that will be your seed? So I could have said, "V'lo amarti ke." I didn't say so. Avol kovashti rachami. I conquered my compassion for my soul. V'lo yeharti achar midisacha, and I did not question your measures. So what do we see from this chazal? From this, we can actually clearly imagine that even because of the command of Hashem, Abraham wasn't forced. He didn't have to. Since he could have excused himself from Hashem, if he wanted, he had a good argument if he wished to. And that's why the Abraham still didn't look for excuses, and he went, even though he was able to. That gives him that special merit. The Ran says that's why Hashem tells him, Kach no, please, because he wasn't obligated. So he explains further that even when Hashem tells him, Hashem says it in a way of no, because he's not really obligated, because the Eibishter already told him, der mit is der Ran masbir. With this interpretation, the Ran explains, was dort steht kach no goimer, no please, loshen bakosha, request. Well, is given a bakosha. This wasn't a direct command, it was just a request. Nit kein hechrach, he wasn't forced to do that. As opposed to the holy people that gave up their lives on the sanctity of Hashem's name in the later generation, they had to give up their lives. They did it. There is a command that you should sanctify. I will be sanctified amongst the Bnei Yisrael, the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. So they had a mitzvah for it, and Avram didn't have the mitzvah. Maybe that's the schus, but the Rebbe, that's what the Ikrim says. But the Rebbe says it's not sufficient. Because even during history, we've had people that were not obligated, and still they had Mesidas Nefesh. There has to be something more about the Mesidas Nefesh of Avram, of taking his son. But this is nit kebiur maspik. That is not a sufficient explanation. In addition, this really has this is something difficult to say. As Oib Yisi Yochel, as Oib Yisi Yochel Lemer, that if let's say that he could have argued and not have to do. So Hashem is asking him because really he can't tell him because I already told you. So if the Eibishter asks you something, it's not just somebody asking you. So it's not a command, it's a bakosha. Malal Sabakoshi is just nitkein hechrech. And you're going to say, Eibishter asked it, so you're not forced to do so. But when the Eibishter allein betazach, if Hashem himself asks something, and even if it's in such a way that you can argue and you can have a good argument, that's not called that you have an option, you can opt out and not do what Hashem wants. Especially Avram. So besides that, this whole idea to say that Avram didn't have to because Eibishter was begging him, but the Eibishter asked for something, even if you have an ability to get out of it, that would not really be called an option, that Avram had an option. But the main thing is that we find that in history too, people didn't have to. Also, amongst the holy people who gave up their lives for Hashem, there were such. Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, their sacrifice to sanctify the name of Hashem is nicht gewend verbunden mit Achiv v'tzivu shel Torah. It wasn't associated to an obligation and a command of the Torah. The contrary. They needed to look, not only were they not commanded, they had to actually search for permission, for a right, to go have Mesiras Nefesh. As known, the debate, whether you're even allowed to give up your life, on those mitzvahs, according to halacha, is yaver v'al yarik. The law is you should not get killed. You should violate and not get killed. Are you still, you want to be better and you still want to give up your life? Even those areas where Torah itself says that you have to violate and not get killed. But people were ready to do on their own to the extreme. So that wouldn't be the only reason what made Avram's Mesiras Nefesh even more. So again, the question is, what is it about Avram's taking Yitzchak to the Akedah that becomes the greatest zechus that we mention all the time? In Chassidus, it explains that what Avram did was the first one. As to start something takes more energy, more commitment, more devotion. And maybe that's why he gets this chos. Dalet says you do der bir bazeh was bringt sich in Chassidus. Says it's known the explanation that is brought down in Chassidus, which explains that Oiftu from Avram Avinu is what's done in Derin. What was the novelty of Avram Avinu consisted in the fact was it is given der Erster, that he was the first one, was his Beigestanden dem Nisoyin from the Mesiras Nefesh. He was number one who withstood that test of giving up, of having Mesiras Nefesh. Was the Ascholef yet der Zach is kosher b'yesur. Starting something is very difficult. Ubelashoin, how you do it, to use the common known language, Kol ha-haschol is cautious. All beginnings are difficult. Aber noch dem, wie Abraham Pasach, after Abraham opened up, had given them sinner from Mesiras Nefesh. He opened the pipeline of self-sacrifice. Is nimshach geworden in Welt that brought down into the world that we can be done, der koyach of Mesiras Nefesh, the power to have self-sacrifice. Und der Fahr is das noch the Masach geringer. That's why later on this is much easier. Hayois as medarf nor a reis bringen min hakoyach alapoyel. That all we have to do is we have to take it out from the potential into actuality, because now we have to deal with the something that has already been done. It's been done. So now everybody can follow that. That's why it is not something new, not something new has been done. But the Rebbe doesn't buy this answer either, l'chayra, because the idea of self-sacrifice is not new even by Avram. Avram allowed himself to be thrown into the furnace. That was Mesiras Nefesh. So it really turns out that starting Mesiras Nefesh for the potential was started by Avraham before. This is aber nicht moving. But it's still not understood that Inyan HaMesiras Nefesh bepoil, that concept of actually self-sacrificing, is nimshach geworden durch Avraham Avinu noch früher wie der Nisoyin HaAkedah. That extended through Avraham Avinu even before, through the test of the Akedah. By them Nisoyin from Ur Kasdim. That was the test that took place by Ur Kasdim. It's called the Ur Kasdim. When Avraham hat sich eingestellt, Abraham put himself in a situation mit Mesiras Nefesh, with a self-sacrifice, to fartilikon, to destroy, kol min avodah, all kinds of idol worship, mefarsim zayin elokus be'olam, and to publicize godliness in the world. Bis with the Rambam bringt es euch bis Sifra Hayat, the extent that he had such self-sacrifice. The Rambam actually brings this down also in his Sefer Hayat, Sefer Halachos, which is Halachos, which means this is very straightforward. As Bikesh HaMelech Lahirgoi, that the king wanted to kill him. And Asaloi Nesid, the miracle happened. So he was already self-sacrificing before Nochmet. And even more, the Rebbe says, not only did it start with the Ur Kasdim, where he brought down the Mesiras Nefesh, over there, he wasn't even told by Hashem, like here, Nochmet. Der Nesoyin von Ur Kasdim, hat in sich lechoire, that test of Ur Kasdim seems to include in it, an advantage with regards to the test of the Akedah. Vorum, that Nesoyin HaAkedah is given al pi hadibur von Obersten. The test of the Akedah was based, the Eberster said, von Eberster, Hashem diber said, quoted before, Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, I think, Barbanel. Hashenken, the Nesoyin von Urkazdim, that Abraham, he did it on his own. Und as der Inyan HaAkedah is not given the erster Fall for Mesiras Nefesh, so he already did Mesiras Nefesh before. He was already ready. And since the matter of Akedah was not the first case of Mesiras Nefesh, not only by even by Avraham wasn't the first case. So we have back our question. In what consists that special advantage of the test of the Akedah? Why are we always mentioning the Akedah as the cornerstone in all of our prayers over magic? It seems like Abraham himself had sacrificed before, brought it into the world, and none of the answers that the Rebbe gave, that he wasn't forced to the Ikrim, well, that was also during the generations, and a child that was Beichana. All these Rebbe does not still explain to us why he is singled out, and that's the special zechus we have all the time. So now the Rebbe is going to explain what is the whole idea really of Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe is going to explain Mesiras Nefesh. You find even Goyim Lahavdil will sometimes give up their life for some motive. That's not Mesiras Nefesh. Means that every entity is created in a way that they love themselves, and you cannot give away your entity unless you figure that somehow it increases your mitzias. Real Mesiras Nefesh means there is no benefit, as the Rebbe will explain now. Hey, that man does verstehen behagdim abiyur. So we'll understand by first explaining in the Mechidush Shebinyan HaMesiras Nefesh B'chlal, what's the novelty about the whole concept of giving up one's life for Hashem. From the biur, from the explanation that we brought, as Avram had geöffnet dem Zinner, that Avram opened the pipeline for Mesiras Nefesh. Azach was bringt mit, Azach was bringt Mayim, uchiyotze bei mimokim lemokim achem. What is a zinner? Pipeline means that it brings, it transfers, it transmits water from one place to another place. So he opened up the pipeline for Mesiras Nefesh ba'olam. The self-sacrifice in the world is move on. So it's understood as on them is nito de metzias for Mesiras Nefesh ba'elam. That means that really there cannot be Mesiras Nefesh in the world. And here we're talking about Mesiras Nefesh is something, unless that Avram opened the pipeline to transmit into the world, it would not be there. Mesiras Nefesh, why not? That's Bora Bazeh. Why would there not be Mesiras Nefesh? Why is it something so unique? That's Bora Bazeh. Mesiras Nefesh means bitla yesh v'metzias. Mesiras Nefesh means the negation of the entity and of your being. Anivra meant, what does it mean, a created being? What it means is that that means that the creator created an entity and a being, or something. Is move on, it's understood as a nivra can be koyach atzme, that a created being on his own, with his own powers, needs sukumen from mitzias. He cannot become to a higher level than his own entity from where he was created, that he's a created being. Like we say the rule, ein chopush matir atzmei chulu. One who's tied, incarcerated, cannot untie himself and needs somebody else to untie you. The river, so for Mesiras Nefesh, muzman hob na koyach mimokom achar. We need power from elsewhere. I've cannot sukum to Mesiras Nefesh, so we should be able to reach Mesiras Nefesh. That's what it seems like. So why do we find seemingly that goyim have Mesiras Nefesh for silly things, to give up their lives? We're saying that's not shaykh, you're an entity. But this is the key of the difference. Because what the goyim are doing is not really Mesiras Nefesh. It's giving up the life for an ulterior, for a benefit. But this seems surprising. We find the concept of Mesiras Nefesh also by the nations of the world. That would be an addition to there is actually an idea as Ben Noach is mitzvah al kiddush Hashem, that also Ben Noach is instructed, he's commanded to sanctify the name of Hashem. But as an event, Kama Falun, Lahabdil, there were many cases, make a distinction between a Yid, when sie haben sich gelost umbringen, they allowed for them to die, to for their beliefs and their opinions, etc. They allowed. So here we're saying for a Yid to allow himself to die, Mesiras Nefesh is illogical, is not possible. It goes against the fact that he was created to be a Metzias. How come they do it? We can say the explanation in this is those allein was a mensch is greater wegeben sein Leben. The fact, just this alone, the person is ready to give away his life and the Meibrishn's for Hashem, cause of Hashem, is noch nit borur, then that's not clear. Adosis amitis ha'inyan for Mesiras Nefesh bittul hametzias. That this is the true idea from self-sacrifice and giving up, negating your entity. Es can sein, it's possible. As is sich Mesiras Nefesh der Fahr, that why is he giving up his life? For the reason was by him that by him it turns out that according to his logic, according to the calculation that he makes, as das leint sich ihm mehr wie bleiben leben. He may consider, he may figure that this is more worthwhile than remaining alive. He may earn something bigger than his life than is here. So this could be a logical conclusion. And if it's a self-sacrifice, which is entirely based on figuring it out, on a calculation, that's possible to be also by the nations of the world a calculated Mesiras Nefesh. That is, he thinks, as durch Meiser Nefesh, when he gives up his life, sich vetter verdienen, he is going to earn. It's still all about him. Vet verdienen. As vet in zukommen b'metzias. he's going to become more entity through that. Other in Sadash Lila, or in the negative side, if he's not going to reach a certain idea level, he doesn't want to live. The dugmas, Olotina Beliboy, quoting from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that he got this anger in his heart, and the Tzchoinus, Victor Befrat, especially by a king and similar, that they don't want to live. It's not so much they want to give up the life, but it's the not wanting to live because he has this strong emotional feeling, but it's something which motivates him, a calculated Mesiras Nefesh, or the Regesh creates by some sort of feeling. No, I'm sorry. That emissary in Mesiras Nefesh is, but the true level of Mesiras Nefesh is as Moiser dem Nefesh. You give up the soul, the vote, that ich. You give up your I, yourself. Give yourself totally over to Hashem. You give yourself over, you devote, which is beyond, above all kinds of calculation intellectually, or the regesh or feeling creates by. Diesen ganzen Bottle zum Obersten, you're entirely subjugated to Hashem in an oifen, in such a way as the eigene Metzias is klal nitev smoking, that your own self does not take up any room. You give yourself up for Hashem. So the Rebbe brings out that while we find people giving up their lives for their beliefs, that's not Mesiras Nefesh. That's actually increasing their entity. They're doing it because they believe that they're going to gain more from this, or they cannot live without it. But to give yourself over when there is no benefit to yourself, and it's just because you're dedicated to Hashem and therefore you don't care, you're ready to even give up your life, that is the idea of Mesiras Nefesh. And the Rebbe is going to explain how that expresses itself specifically in the Nisoyin of the Akedah even more than Ur Kasdim. Both, the Shloimah, we can say, as Begilui, that openly, which means openly, B'lishum Sofik Ba'olam, there was no doubt. Because sometimes we're not sure why you're doing it, but where do we see this, that without any doubt at all, there could be no doubt, Shum Sof Ba'olam, he does give der Oiftu un Ilu in dem Nisoyin Akedah. That was the novelty, and that was the advantage of the test of the Akedah, Legabe dem Nisoyin from Ur Kasdim, relative to the test of Ur Kasdim. The Mesiras Nefesh in Ur Kasdim is bashtanen in them, that self-sacrifice in Ur Kasdim consisted the fact was Avram hat sich Meiser Nefesh given, that Avram gave up his life of the Pirsum von Emunah b'Hashem ba'olam, on the publicizing of the belief in Hashem in the world. So he gave up his life for publicizing Emunah in Hashem. And that's why in the world there may be a thought, people may think, as the Mesiras Nefesh is given up in Cheshbon de Kedusha, maybe this was a calculated Mesiras Nefesh, a holy calculation. Sein Iberzeigung, he was so convinced in their Neutigkeit of the necessity from Lahoyris Oilam, Shoy Meshamish Ba'afela, to illuminate the world that was serving in darkness, is given mit Azah Starkheit, is was with such force, Bees, as er hat sich nicht gerechnet mit kein Meineya, he did not take into consideration anybody preventing, er hat sich der Reuf Meiser Nefesh given. He self-sacrificed. So even that, even though he gives up his life, but maybe that was because he was convinced that this is so important, so nothing stopped him. But the idea of Akedah on its own, it did not own, there was nothing else there Norvos Yirei Elikim Ata, just that he's a man that fears God. Und der Vater hat Avram sich Meiser Nefesh gewähnt. That's why he self-sacrificed. So there was nothing else at the time, just because Hashem told him, and you fear Hashem, and that's what you're ready to do. There is no calculation, there's no motivations over here, other than your devotion to Hashem. And the Rebbe adds in the brackets, nobody would even know about it. And therefore there wasn't even a big publicity. Says the Baya feeling it given that Inyan, wasn't even the idea for Mefaris Zayin Ba'olam to publicize in the world how deep one needs to devote. If there were people around and somebody would know, then you would take a lesson. Look how deep, how much devotion you're even ready to give up your son, because the Eibishter said, because as the Eber and Ezra says, there was nobody there. At the time that he tied his son, even his Na'orim, they were 3 days. He left them behind, and then he went to the mountain just with Yitzchak. Not only would it not be publicized, but Vigeret b'Mokam as spoken elsewhere, he says, given l'chayra bistira, this was not only not accomplished any public, but this would be a contradiction to them inyan from Pirsum Elokusi is Baruch Bailam, from publicizing Hashem's blessed godliness in the world. If he had taken Yitzchak as an oila, well, neker geworden, that would have uprooted that main that Abraham planted, that main planting, und der Inyan from Pirsum Elokus Bailam would nicht gehabt kein Hemmshech chas v'sholom. And the idea of publicizing godliness in the world would not have any continuation, because Yitzchak would be gone. So not only would this not accomplish any positive results, but it would actually be a negative. So what was the reason for Mesiras Nefesh? Is given because that's what Hashem wanted and asked him to do. The ganze Inyan Mesiras Nefesh, the Akedah, the entire idea of the Mesiras Nefesh, the Akedah is given was Norval that Eibishter hat gewollt und gebeten das. It's just because Hashem wanted and asked for this. The Vater des Avram getan, that's why he did it. Mit dem ist bestanden der Öfter von der Sohn HaAkedah. Was Avram Avinu is beigestanden. This is the novelty of the test of the Akedah that Avram withstood it. The Akedah Mesiras Nefesh is given by Eifen. The binding Mesiras Nefesh of Yitzchak was in such a way as it had legamri nit kein upleg, as it had legamri nit kein upleg in seichel. It has no sense. It doesn't make any sense logically. So why is he doing? As is mer nit v'rotzen HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is what Hashem wants him. And therefore, bitla mitzias betachlis, he gives up his own entity totally for what the Eibishter wants, for the Eibishter asked him. So Zion, so now we understand why the other ones, if he doesn't stand by this, they'll say they have no substance, meaning it's not the real Mesiras Nefesh giving up. Pikol analize, Muvan was the Gemara Zocht. Also understand that the Gemara says, Shalo yemru ein mamish barishenim, so people shouldn't say that there is no substance to the early one. When Avram would Chalila nit baigestanden dem Nisoyin Akedah, God forbid, if he had not withstand the test of the Akedah, then you might have thought the younger people are going to say, as it is beigestanden the Friere die Conditiones, that the reason why he was able to withstand the previous test, the Farbas they fitted his intellect and holiness. It made sense. But to actually give away your life, which is etzem or mamosh to give away your entity, your soul itself. Not any reason, not giving your seichel away, but you're giving your essence away, is al koponim any that would be, we wouldn't know, it wouldn't be obvious. Durch dem, was it is beigestanden, the Mesoyin HaAkedah, by passing and standing by this test of the Akedah. But so this pointed to before, As also the previous test is a Beigestan mit Mesidas Nefesh Mamre. They were talking as withstood with total Mesidas Nefesh. Mit fuller Abwegegebenkeit, with total devotion, with Tachlis Abitl and the ultimate subjugation. Because you see, when he did it over here, that this is really who Abraham is. And now it's revealed and open that the other ones were also on this level, that were all done with full Mesidas Nefesh. And Ches, das is euch der Bier in them. And this also explains was the Psichas Atziner Ba'olam, which Mesidas Nefesh of Abraham opened up the Tziner in the world. The Rebbe asked, but he had Mesidas Nefesh in the Rekazdim. If Mesidas Nefesh is by Misoyin HaAkeda, it's dafke by the test of the Akeda, or not durch the Misoyin the Rekazdim, but not through the test of the Rekazdim. Psichas Atziner of Mesidas Nefesh is, when we talk about opening the pipeline for Mesidas Nefesh, it's not a rational motivation, a calculated Mesidas Nefesh. That they're going to have also. The opening of Mesidas Nefesh is as Avraham Avinu had Meish given to Eden, that he inherited to the Yidden the Mkoyach HaMesidas Nefesh Mamash, the power for actual, full Mesidas Nefesh. Emes Mesidas Nefesh, true Mesidas. Biz Adosis the Rotzen for Yeder Yid, that becomes the will of every Yid, which is L'Ritzoinchem Mamash, it becomes your, to bring it L'Ritzoinchem, that is what he wants. Was their far, Ben Aid is Meiser Nefesh for Neibishtim today, or in the history, when a Yid gives up his life for Hashem, Afilei Na'naif. So even if it's a way, was Bechitzonius, externally, man may think as he's mitacheshbon. Maybe he has some calculation why he's doing it. So we say no. Be'emes, he does be'emes, nita mesidas nefesh al pi cheshbon, is not self-sacrifice based on an accounting, a calculation, nor mesidas nefesh mamish, but actual mesidas nefesh. Aid geht weg sein ganze Moshes. A Yid gives away his entire being, his entire essence to Hashem. The Mailam Mikol Cheshbon, beyond any calculations. That opened up, that gave the clarity what Avraham inherited. He opened up the tziner that this is something we sacrifice ourselves. And even if we don't see it, but this is l'ritzoinchem, this is what we really want. Bis wie der Alter Rebbe bringt in Shulchan Aruch, to the extent the Alter Rebbe brings in the Shulchan Aruch. As toiv leimer b'chol yom parshas ha'akedah chudu, that it's best to say every day the portion of the Akedah. V'gam kedei lachniya yitzrei, also to subdue your inclination, lavad Hashem yisbarach, to serve as a commission, Masa Yitzchak Nafshe, like Yitzchak gave over his life. Now we're saying the Parshas Akedah so that we should subdue our Yetzer, like Yitzchak gave himself over. The Chayre Vikem and Zugleichen. It would seem, how can we compare the Avodah for Yeder in the service of every Yid, Lachniya Yitzrei, to subdue his inclination, Lavad Hashem Yisborech, to serve Hashem, to them was Moshe Yitzchak Nafshe, to that which Yitzchak gave over his life. Was his given Mesidas Nefesh betachlis hashleimus kinal. That was self-sacrifice in the ultimate wholesomeness. So how could we say that we're doing that? Nor valdur them was Avraham Pesach and Sinner and Mesidas Nefesh. The fact that Avraham opened up the pipeline from Mesidas Nefesh, Mamish, actual Mesidas Nefesh is Yeder Avodah Funayid. So then, whenever a Yid does an Avodah, it doesn't matter really what he's thinking, but it's really that is happening over there. That anytime we do an Avodah, we're a seed of Avram. Aben v'yirish Avram, we're a son and an inheritor of Avram. Merosh Kilas Yaakov, this is the inheritance for the community of Yaakov. We are also subduing our Yetzer. We can do it, subdue our Yetzer to serve the Eberster as Yitzchak gave over his life. Sie ist Punkt wie Avram führt ihm zu der Akeda. It's just as Avram is leading him to the Akeda. Das ist der Emes HaRotzen. This is the true will von jeder Eden, from every Yid, sich abgeben, mamish zum Ebersten, to devote yourself actually fully to Hashem. This is Mesichas, Shabbos Parshas Vayeshev, Tovshin Lamed Aleph, and Shabbos Parshas Matis and Masei, Tovshin Lamed Hey.